Speedball Mike Bailey, thank you for joining us. How are you, man?
My pleasure. So I am doing okay. Like I feel like given the times when you ask people how are you, the answer is never great. I'm fantastic, everything good. Like nothing's ideal, but we're all managing, we're all doing our best.
Yeah, it's been one of those questions where when we ask people this year, it's always been the same. It's been like, well, I'm doing okay, I guess.
Right?
Yeah, and everyone says the same thing at the moment.
Luckily, it's a subjective thing, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a funny old year. It really has, but I always wonder what someone will say when I say how you're doing. But yeah, 2020's been pretty bad, hasn't it? It's kind of sucked. But never mind. Let's rock and roll. But yeah, I know I mentioned before we started recording. I'll put it on the podcast for him as well. Reindeer Man says hello. So.
Oh, hello, Reindeer Man.
Hello from Reindeer Man. He'll be very happy about that. But yeah, thank you for coming on, man. I really appreciate it. We've been talking about getting you on for a while. We're big fans. Callum's a huge fan. I remember when we first started doing this, he was like, Mike Bailey's one of the guys we need.
Yeah, so you've been on my list for about 3 years, so
I appreciate
that. But before we talk wrestling as well, you have a legit background in Taekwondo.
Yes.
Yeah. How old was you?
Way more legit than my background in pro wrestling.
Yeah, you can tell.
Wow. How old was you when you started Taekwondo then? How did that come about?
So I was, I think, 12 or 11, something like that. So it was not like super young. People start that sometimes when they're little kids, but it's kind of just. The funny thing is when I started Taekwondo, it was actually like in my mind, I had already been like backyard wrestling with like my brother and friends for several years by then. And the thought, like I had a friend who just said, would you like to come and try a class at the Taekwondo school I'm going to? It was nearby. So I just went. I didn't have like any, like I didn't make a decision, oh, I want to start doing martial arts. We didn't have a plan for that. Or I was not like a fan of martial arts back then. But like I thought, oh, this is going to be really good for pro wrestling one day. Yeah. And then I Taekwondo caught on, and of course, before I could start pro wrestling, the focus was heavily on Taekwondo. And for a long time, even when I was wrestling, it was about 50-50, where probably I was competing at a relatively high level in Taekwondo, and wrestling, I was just starting out. So like eventually, of course, wrestling took over, and that became a much more like profitable and that made a lot of sense in the long term. Like I remember the last Taekwondo tournament I did, which was I think in 2014 or something, which was when wrestling was starting to take off for me. Like I was actually, when I say take off, I mean, again, that's a relative term, but I was like doing very limited traveling within Canada, and I was making some money at wrestling, which is totally different from like, if you look at it, Taekwondo is an amateur sport, and there's no professional Taekwondo. Like there's no way to go and be a professional Taekwondo fighter. Like you go from great amateur boxing to a great professional boxer. So you're never going to make any money at it. So it kind of came to the choice between I can pay, like, if you're going to do a Taekwondo tournament, you need to, so cutting weight is the hardest thing that luckily you don't have to do for wrestling. Then you drop 10 pounds in 24 hours. That's not fun. And then you have to pay the competition fee. You have to pay for your own travel. You have to buy the equipment and your coaching and all that. Whereas wrestling, even though like it's not, back then I was probably making, I don't know, $30, $40 for a show or something very small, but still, if you can make some money versus pay loads of money for a tournament, then the choice kind of makes itself. But luckily things worked out. Like Taekwondo is fantastic. I'm not taking anything away from it as a sport.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
It definitely helped with your career, right? I mean, it's how important do you think it's been to your pro wrestling career then? Do you think you would have got as far as you have done now without Taekwondo?
Absolutely not. But it depends. Right now, you're creating a theoretical scenario where I haven't done Taekwondo, and that can go one of two ways. We can just go me just completely mindless in Taekwondo, in which case I wouldn't have made it very far because I would just another like flippy, probably pro wrestling guy. But most likely, if my friend hadn't told me that day, would you like to come do Taekwondo, I would have figured out another sport to do that would have also helped me with wrestling. Which is probably like the main piece of advice I give to anyone who wants to get into pro wrestling and is either like too young to do it or doesn't have access to school, is just find something else. All the best professional wrestlers come in with a skill and then apply that skill to professional wrestling, whether it's like something that applies very directly, like amateur wrestling, or mixed martial arts, which is a thing now and wasn't when I started wrestling, but like even dancing or something is tremendously helpful for pro wrestling. Like there's a lot of great pro wrestlers out there that are also dancers, but just like bring a skill to it, and that's what's gonna set you apart. And then like when my pro wrestling started to get good was when I dropped like the conventional idea of professional wrestling that was taught and decided to focus. And I'm much better at Taekwondo than I am at wrestling. I'm going to highlight that in my matches and really use that to set myself apart.
Well, speaking of wrestlers who are dancers, one of my favorite matches of the last few years was yourself versus Cara Noir in RIPTIDE. That's a perfect example of somebody. What a great match.
Thank you. So that was that the first one we had? I can't remember. So I know we had that one in RIPTIDE. We had one at 16 carats, which was loads more fun because it was twice as long. But of course, like he's fantastic. He's really the definition of that. When you can bring, like he has, honestly, like outside of pro wrestling, he just has loads of skills that he then mixes in and brings in. And that's what makes Cara Noir so fantastic and so much different, is that aside, he's not just a good wrestler, he's a good wrestler, but a lot of people are. So he also has all those tools that
entrance alone is amazing. And especially with the way that RIPTIDE is produced on the camera, it looks incredible. I had goosebumps watching that match with you and Cara Noir, just because it looked so good. It looks like a film, like a movie.
That is always my favorite part of wrestling Cara Noir, is just sitting back and watching his entrance. And just being in the ring, for the audience reaction to his entrance, like seeing it on camera, as beautiful as it is, doesn't do it justice. Like the really the best part is watching everyone around just complete silence, jaw drop. I'm sorry, that was very, very bad podcasting on my part to just do for those who can't see, I had my jaw dropped as people have during Cara's entrance.
We saw him in the UK. We got to see it live ourselves, and you're right. It's something special. I mean, the lights went out, and I wasn't the first time I'd seen him as well. I was like, what the hell's going on? And then this music played, and he came out, and it was amazing. I was taken aback. It was incredible. And like you said, he's good in the ring as well. He makes up for it in the ring as well.
It's mesmerizing. I'm also I have a thing about pro wrestling entrances. Like I'm weird about it because I remember like one of the things like that I noticed when I started wrestling, I was just always wanted to give my best 100%, and you sort of learn delayed gratification over time. And my entrance would literally, like, I would do 4 backflips in my entrance. Like I would come running down the entranceway if there was one. I would flip into the ring, then go on the top rope, flip off again, and then the audience would love that. And then by the time the match started, they'd be tired of clapping. So like if you watch my entrance now, I do some things, I throw some fun kicks and punches, but I try to stay as calm and relaxed as possible in order to like save the excitement for the match. So I'm always fascinated by people with great entrances. Like I remember
when they're different entrances, like Cara Noir.
When they're different.
So unique.
It's so special, and then that becomes part of his match, and it's really part of his thing, which I completely try to exclude from mine. So it's fascinating.
I think what I like about Cara Noir's entrance is almost like you said, you can tire out the crowd before you even do a move, sometimes. But what I like about Cara Noir is just from his entrance, you know everything about him. You know who he is. You know what kind of person he is. His entrance tells you about him. So even if you haven't ever seen him wrestle before, just seeing his entrance is so cool.
Yeah, it gave me goosebumps when we saw him. And I totally get that with the entrances. Like I'm 36 years old, and the Undertaker's entrance still gives me goosebumps now. You know, so it's a special thing. It really is. But speaking of, obviously, you said you wrestled him in Germany for WXW. What was it like working for WXW and being a part of the 16-carat tournament?
So I've been working on and off with WXW for, I think the first time was maybe 2016 or maybe even 15. Like I know one of the first times I went to Europe was for them, and like 16 karat is always amazing. Like it's one of those, all the best wrestlers just meeting in one place for one weekend to have the craziest matches possible, and it's always really great.
It's a book me and Callum into to do the 16 carat. It's on our list.
While we're on the subject of like wrestling in Europe, obviously we'd be remiss to not mention you wrestled in our hometown last year in Hull, England for WrestleVerse.
Yes, that's right, WrestleVerse.
It's just down the road from us. It's our friends who run it. So when we found out they'd got Speedball Mike Bailey coming, I was marking out. I was like, really? So what was that like for you? Because WrestleVerse is quite a unique promotion in how to do it.
Yeah, so luckily I got to wrestle the great Rampage Johnson.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Rampage Brown. Yeah.
Which is great because, well, a few weeks before I got to have a match for title against the great Rampage Brown.
Yeah.
So we were able to play off of that match in order to make something great at WrestleVerse, and like couldn't have been more fun. I honestly, the match was a distraction because I had so much fun just watching the rest of the show and all the gimmicks they were doing. And I think someone was attacked by a bear.
Yeah, Matt Myers, Chuck Wood.
Beautiful. Yeah. Chuck Wood, of course.
It's amazing when you think about it, like, because the UK, like we say to a few of our guests, like there was a point where there was only a couple of companies, and now these companies all over the UK, nearly every city you go to, and we're spoiled now. And we've got two in our own city now, and it's a wonderful thing for us as wrestling fans.
Yeah.
But you touched on Rampage. Obviously, he's just signed for NXT UK. Everyone we speak to says just how good he is. I mean, what's your thoughts on Rampage and working with him?
Right. No, clearly he is. Like, I would sing his praises all day, but I have nothing to say that hasn't already been said. Like, one of those guys is just world-class talents. And when I say, like, when you're really, really bad at wrestling, you don't care. Like, it's easy, there's no effort. And then it gets hard, and then it becomes easy again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know? It feels easy for Rampage Brown. He makes everything about pro wrestling, like, even though he puts great effort into everything he does, he makes everything look so easy.
Yeah, that's what a lot of people have said. He makes it seem really easy because he's so good. He makes the hard things seem really easy. But you can say the same thing like about yourself. And I don't know how you do half the stuff you do in the ring. Like, your style to me is quite unique. I think it was you wrestled Pac in OTT, I believe, last year. That match was crazy. Like, I've never seen such a technical, high-flying encounter. That was insane. Getting to wrestle someone with a style like Pac, which is quite similar to your own in the sense, like, you're quite high-flying and technical, so is Pac. What's it like working with Pac? Because he's doing great for himself right now. What's your thoughts on Pac and your matches you've had with him?
Well, first of all, thank you for like the 10 lovely compliments you threw at me in that soundbite. But yeah, no, Pac's great. Of course, like he and I have had completely different like paths. Of course, he had just come a long stint with NXT at that point.
Yeah.
Or I think maybe it was a little while after, but still, there are similarities. But really, what's going to make the match interesting is focusing on the contrasts.
Yeah.
Right. Like obviously we have different things that we can do, and like we're both high flyers, but we use the high flying in completely different ways. And I think something that's made Pac so interesting is how he's like embraced being such a heel character, but still doing all the high flying.
Yeah.
But as a bad guy, and then when he does the flips, you still enjoy it, but still want to boo him, and that's really the magic behind what he's done. So, like, he's figured himself out so well. So, of course, like again, becomes easy to work with someone like this. It becomes easy to highlight both of our strengths.
Yeah, that's very true. I can't even imagine how hard it must be to play a bad guy, a heel character, but also still do the flips, because most fans just want to cheer for the flips, don't they?
Right.
So it must be quite a challenge.
That's what he's masterfully figured out.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's such a talented guy. But I mean, you're a guy who's travelled all over the world, and Europe and places like that. One of the places when we ask people, they always say they want to go to Japan. I know you've already wrestled in Japan. And what's it like wrestling in Japan for you? I mean, is that a style of wrestling that you enjoy competing in?
So yeah, absolutely. Of course, it was a goal of mine since I was like very young. I remember I used to, the way I was introduced to Japanese wrestling was like probably on like Kaza. I don't know if you remember really, really early file sharing.
Oh yeah, I used to use File all the time.
I had been wrestling.
Yeah.
Right? I had watching wrestling only on TV up until that point. Then when I became online, I was able to find matches, and I found like the old Misawa versus Kawada matches from All Japan. And that just completely blew my mind. If you've been watching only WF at that point and then stumble up on that, you're like, wow, these guys are crazy. It's crazy. So yeah, wrestling in Japan had been a goal of mine, something I wanted to do. And of course, like I couldn't be happier with my time with DDT. Japan is my favorite place to wrestle. Like the best way to explain it is everywhere in the world is somewhere on the spectrum in between Japan and Mexico.
Yeah.
Where in Mexico, the way wrestling happens very often, of course there's exceptions, but is, the lucha's in town, so let's go and see it. It's going to be a big event in a stadium. Everyone's drinking beer. They're not paying attention to the wrestling unless there's someone flying off the top rope, which luckily there often is.
Yeah.
It's just a party, and they're going to enjoy the party. But in Japan, they go to watch wrestling, and they pay attention, and they keep track of everything that's happening. And that allows you to tell a lot more, like complex stories, and really have those details that you put into your matches pay off a lot more than you do in Mexico, where people are not paying attention. Like every place in the world I've wrestled falls somewhere in between those two.
That's a really good way of putting it, though. Like, I didn't realize the difference between Mexico and Japan. I always thought they were quite similar, but I guess to a fan, it is two very different styles, isn't it? Lucha Libre and Puro is, very different.
It is. It's completely different, and I think it's. You talk about Pac, and that's someone who's like figured that out extremely well. But like every audience is different, and they demand something different, and so you have to really adapt your style to that, right? You have to wrestle differently in Japan, and you have to wrestle differently in Mexico, and that's sort of what like adapts the style. There's a reason that people in Mexico wrestle the way they do, is because that's the best way for them to make the most out of their performance. And in Japan, wrestle the way they do.
Yeah. Where would you say the UK is? Would you say they're somewhere in the middle?
But again, it depends where. There's like, are we talking about Hall, or are we talking about the Cockpit in London? Those are very different audiences. Well, so WrestleVerse is pretty much in the middle of that. Like the audience doesn't know who anyone is. That's kind of by design because the WrestleVerse was all new characters, and so like part of the challenge becomes getting them to know you and then getting them into it. Whereas like in Japan, the wrestling fans, they've seen everything, right?
Yeah.
So everything you have to do to be interested, like you can, that allows you to not only play on tropes that they know, but also create new things in order to be different. Where in Mexico, it doesn't matter what you do as long as it's cool, right?
Yeah.
This is exactly somewhere in the middle. Some people might know wrestling, most people probably won't. So you get to educate them and show them, but it still has to be like a fun show.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Lucha Libre, like you said, is very flashy, isn't it? Whereas
Yes,
wrestling in Japan is flashy, but there's always that underlying story to it. And I think that's maybe a reason that I don't watch much lucha is I don't know if it's just me, but I never seem to pick up on the story that's being told as easy. But when I'm watching Japanese wrestling, I always seem to pick up on what the story is. I don't know if it's just like lost on me, but I think that's why I prefer Japanese wrestling to lucha libre.
right. But I mean, like that's fair. They're completely different styles, and what you enjoy is perfectly valid.
Yeah.
Like people who watch wrestling and their interest is they want to see cool stunts. Well, then of course they're going to love lucha libre a lot more than a long, slow burn, complex Japanese wrestling match, and that's perfectly valid.
Yeah, I think a lot of people take offense to it sometimes, don't they? Like when you say, "Oh, I don't like this style of wrestling," they'll have a go at you for it, and it's.
So I think the part that's silly is not realizing that like wrestling can be many things, and say when you say no, it has to be this way, but like you can say it has to be this way for a specific audience, and that's what works better for them, and it's fine. Like wrestling that is produced for like an episodic television content in front of cameras with announcers and instant replays and multiple camera angles is going to be a lot different than wrestling that is going to be not watched after it happens live and is going to be in front of 200 people that are literally like less than 2 meters away from the ring, and they like if you're in a 10,000 seat arena, I can do a bit. This again going to be bad pod, but if I want the audience to know that I'm punching the guy, I have to go way over my head and then make sure that it makes a huge noise and is the biggest movement possible in order for the people way in the back to be able to see. But like 90% of the places where I wrestle in England, there are like 16 Carat is a perfect example. There's people literally slapping the ring. People are literally right next to the ring, right? So if you throw a punch or a strike or anything and you don't touch the person for real, well, then they'll be able to see it very easily, right? So you need to contextualize everything, and the mistake people make is saying, no, this works, this doesn't. But where?
Yeah, that's so true. So true. I think a lot of the guests we've spoken to have said like the different styles of wrestling are like different flavors of ice cream, and not everybody likes every flavor of ice cream, and that's okay.
Perfect.
Yeah, basically.
Perfect. There is another company. Sorry, go on. You're going to say something?
Yeah. More so, you have to contextualize. Like if you serve goddamn Ben and Jerry's in Italy, they're gonna claim that it's not gelato.
That's it.
I'm watching. You know, Somebody Feed Phil. Have you seen that show on Netflix?
Which one?
He just goes around and eats. It's like all of those shows. You guys have been watching a lot of it.
No, I haven't
Those
seen
different
it.
places, and all the countries have their own types of ice cream, and they demand everything. And if you gave them something that's completely different, then it wouldn't necessarily work.
That's exactly it, and that applies to wrestling definitely.
Yeah. Another company you work for. We spoke to Brody King a week ago, and we were talking about PWG, Pro Wrestling Guerrilla, and he was talking about how special that was for him being a part of that. How special was it for you to compete there?
It was amazing, and it's completely changed for me the way I look at my experience there. Like over the years, it's been just about just about 5 years, a little bit more than 5 years since my last PWG match. And I, looking like back then, I feel like I didn't really get to enjoy any of it because I was trying so hard to keep up. Like it was surreal. It was amazing. The audience there is incredibly appreciative, and the rest of the roster was amazing. Like they're all making millions of dollars now. But and I was like really, really trying to keep up, and I'm really glad that I got to be a part of that. And it's like I made a tweet recently about it, but it's bittersweet looking back now and seeing like how much better I am right now compared to how I was then, and like just thinking how I could have performed there the way I wrestle now and how that would have been. It's just that's what gets stuck in my mind when I think about it more than anything. But yeah, I like amazing experience, of course.
I think that was the first place that I ever saw you wrestle was PWG, and it might have been against Adam Cole. So I think you had a match with Adam Cole. I think that was the first time I'd seen you. And was it you did Battle of Los Angeles a couple of times, didn't you?
Only the one time.
Only the one time, yeah. What was that like then, Battle of Los Angeles? Because that's like a bucket list for most people, you know, getting to do Battle of Los Angeles.
So that weekend was like physically the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. Bet. Like, so the night one was where I got a victory over Drew Galloway.
Yeah.
In like the closest I've ever been to quitting mid-match ever.
Really?
Where he was just gigantic. Yeah. Oh yeah. The building was like super hot, but I flew and then wrestled immediately, which is always makes things more difficult. And he's just a huge, incredibly strong man. And so that was really, really rough. And then the next day, doing those 3 matches back to back. Like I remember after the show, the finals was me, Chris Hero, and Zack Sabre. And afterwards, we were just talking. We're like, yeah, we like could have been in car accidents and we'd feel better.
Oh God.
Yeah.
That's brutal. Like I can see why it would hurt so much, because you're wrestling 4 times over 2 days.
4 times over 2 days, but in a building with 300 people in
no air conditioning.
Los Angeles. Oh, yeah.
I've always heard that about because it's the American Legion Center, isn't it? That got knocked down. Yeah, I always heard that there was no air conditioning there. 300 people fit into a tiny space. You know, the locker room's tiny backstage. So I can see why you'd be, you know, knackered after 2 days. But apart from the physical pain, was it worth it?
Of course, worth it. Again, I'm well aware that a lot of people, even to this day, and I've done bigger things since PWG, but that's where a lot of people know me from. And wrestling there like opened a ton of doors for me, and that's what like got me my first match with Rev Pro. Was my first match overseas ever, and that also opened a lot of doors. And like I definitely wouldn't be where I am without PWG.
No, absolutely, man. And before we start to wrap up as well and let you go and enjoy your day, we've got to end on a light note. How awesome is your fiance at commentating?
She is fantastic. Like, she is the best, just the best. Like, to me, and I try not to be biased about this. Like, it's not just that she's good or that she has a place. She's the best. I can't say differently. She's the best commentator out there. That's
congratulations on the engagement as well.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, man. So we spoke to Vader a couple of weeks ago. She's an absolute sweetheart, dude. You're a lucky man. And she's awesome at what she does. And so are you. Before we let you go, though, man, is there anything you want to promote? Social medias, merchandise?
Yeah, I'm at Speedball Bailey on Twitter and Instagram. I have a Pro Wrestling Tees store. But I don't have anything to plug right now as we're fully under lockdown and there really isn't anything to do or shows to go to. But if you're not familiar with my work, please go on YouTube and watch some of my matches. And then I've got some great ones that you may know. Like Keith Lee is another one that's on YouTube that gets shared a lot. I know I have a couple more. I don't know if that match with Karen Moore that you talked about from RIPTIDE is on YouTube. Is it?
Yeah, it's on YouTube. Yeah. I've watched it. I've watched it a few times on YouTube. It's great.
Yes, it's great. So if you haven't seen them yet, go and find them, watch them, and if you like them, then share them, tell your friends, watch other interviews that I've done, watch other podcasts, and yeah.
Shout out to Last Minute Wrestling podcast as well. Then you spoke to Frank as well, Frank Mandolini.
Yes. Frank is great.
And of course the Reindeer Man, and now Ringsiders. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on, Mike. Absolute pleasure speaking with you.
Pleasure is all mine. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you. And hopefully we can get you back in the new year at some point. We'll have another chat.
I would love to. Hopefully I'll have some actual shows to plug by then.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Hell yeah. For now, he is Speedball Mike Bailey. We are Ringsiders. Thank you.